Here are 10 of my favorite conversation activities for kindergarten. So I'm talking mostly about ESL or EFL very young learners. And so the first activity I like is flashcards. I almost never go into a kindergarten class without a set of flashcards. They're kind of like my security blanket. So if you have flashcards, you can do a million things. You could show, for very, very beginners, you could show a picture and students just have to say the word cat. For slightly higher level learners, you could get them to make a sentence. Show a picture of a cat, it's a cat. For even higher level learners, you could show the cat and they have to make a question. Do you have a cat? Yes, I do, or no, I don't. So flashcards are such a nice way to get students talking and kind of like the beginning stages of conversation. All right, the second idea I have for a conversation class for kindergarten students is hot potato. So this is when you have an object. It can be the actual, if you have the real hot potato game, it can be that. Or you can find like a soft object. I like to do a soft object, like a stuffed animal, maybe like a softball, something like that, because people kind of get like a little bit rowdy during this game and they might end up like throwing things. I don't want anyone to get hurt if it's like, or anything to break. So students pass around the stuffed animal and then you can have some music, and when the music stops, that person that's holding that object has to answer a question. So for example, I could ask, how old are you? And they would have to answer, I'm 5, something like that. So whatever you've taught your students, those are the questions you could relate it to. The next conversation activity I have for kindergarten students is songs and chants. So if you're kind of like me and you're not musical at all, that's no problem. I just go on YouTube and you can find a million different songs and chants for little kids kind of related to conversation and just whatever topic you're teaching that day. There are things like introduce yourself and how old are you and what's your name and all those kinds of things. There are a million chants designed for English learners. So just have a look on YouTube and you're sure to find something that will work for your class. All right, the next conversation activity for kindergarten students is picture prompt. So this is when I flash up a picture related to the topic of the day, and then I just kind of elicit some words or just kind of like feedback from the students related to that picture. So for example, maybe we're talking about like at the playground or something like that. So I would flash up a picture of maybe just lots of kids playing at the playground, and then I would ask students, like, what do you see? And then they could say, I see a ball, or they could probably more likely they would just shout out ball, and then you could kind of reframe it into a sentence. Oh, you see a ball. Or else you could ask a question, how many balls? There are 5 balls, something like that. So it's kind of a versatile activity and it really can be adapted to whatever level of students you're teaching. All right, the next idea I have for conversation for kindergarten students is to use some routines. So little kids love routines. I think adults often like routines as well, but especially little kids, because they just kind of want to know what to expect when they come into your classroom. And it's actually easier for the teacher if you do routines and students kind of know what's happening and there's no real confusion about what's going on. So when students come into my class, into my kindergarten classes, we have a little circle time, and then I kind of ask the typical questions. What day of the week is it? How's the weather? And I ask a couple students, how are you doing today? What did you eat for breakfast? What did you have for lunch? Kind of whatever the case might be. So just have a little circle time, use some routines, and just kind of have some casual conversation with your students that way, just to start off the class. All right, the next thing you can do is to use some discussion starters. So if you're talking about whatever topic, make up some kind of conversation questions. So this is assuming that your students can read. If they can't, it will have to be more teacher-centered and you'll have to do it together. But if students can read, you can just make up some little discussion starters. For example, if you're doing the playground theme again, and then you could have some little questions. What's your favorite thing at the playground? How often do you go to the playground? And students could kind of just choose a question, then they could choose someone, and then they could ask that question to that person. If students can't really read, then it's the teacher that can maybe ask those questions to the students. But just kind of prepare some discussion questions. It's easier to do it beforehand, at least for me, than just thinking of it off the top of my head. That stresses me out a little bit. I like to have a bit of a security blanket and just a nice list of questions related to the topic of the day that I can go into the class with. All right, the next conversation activity for kindergarten kids is show and tell. So show and tell is where students can just bring in a little object from home. And if it's like an animal, maybe they don't want to bring their cat, for example. So they could do a picture. If they like love their piano, they could do a picture of a piano if it's something too big. But they can just do like a very quick presentation and just kind of show their object or their thing to their classmates. And what makes it into a conversation activity is that I try to encourage follow-up questions. So sometimes if students are kind of lower level, that would be the teacher asking follow-up questions, but even better is when the other students can kind of ask some follow-up questions. And the teacher might have to give some examples of how to do this, but then students usually will catch on after the teacher kind of asks a few questions related to this. Okay, the next conversation activity is I'm an alien. So this is a fun way to kind of introduce holidays. So if there's a big holiday coming up in your country where you're teaching, like Christmas, Halloween, whatever, pretend that you're an alien and you don't know what this holiday is. And you can say, Christmas, what is Christmas? And then students could shout out at you, it's a holiday. And then you could say, oh, interesting. So what kind of food do you eat? Oh, you eat turkey. And then you could say, you get presents. Why do you get presents? And then they could shout out, Santa. Santa gives presents. So this is just kind of a fun way to talk about holidays. So the key is just making it kind of fun and pretending that you know absolutely nothing about it. And I even like to show like a little picture of like an alien and maybe like a little spaceship and a little planet, something like that, and say, I'm an alien. And then I point to the picture and maybe I'll put my face on the alien, something like that. So you can kind of just use a bit of humor to introduce this activity. All right, the next idea I have for conversation class for kindergarten students is to use some books. So I know that books implies reading, and of course it's reading, but you can also have lots of conversation opportunities using simple storybooks. So there's often lots of pictures. So you can like point to the pictures and to say, oh, how many children, like what's he doing, how many balloons are there? There are a million ways that you can talk about things that you see or things that you read in a book. And the final tip I have for conversation is to also focus on questions. So I know that it's often the case where the teacher asks questions and then students answer the questions. However, I like to get my students also asking me questions. So it's quite easy to do this. If, for example, if you're having a little circle time or just a little conversation time, if I'm asking students, how are you today? And they say, oh, I'm great. And then I just kind of wait and then I gesture with my hands. And then usually at least one or two students will say, oh, how about you, teacher? How are you today? All right, so those are it for my top 10 conversation activities for kindergarten students. If you like these ideas, please be sure to check out my book, 101 ESL Activities for Kids, and please hit like, subscribe, and also leave a comment and tell me your favorite activity for kindergarten students. Okay, catch you next time.